So I haven't done a book talk in a while, but I read a book and I wanted to upload a little review about it. It's called Dade Explores the Cosmos by Nash Jenkins. This book came out in 2023. I honestly hadn't heard about it, and I heard it recommended on a podcast that I listened to about 3 weeks ago. And the guy who recommended it, and it's like a political podcast, and they do like one little recommend a couple times a week. Usually it's something cultural reference, like watch this a television show, read this article, and occasionally read this book. And the way that the guy who runs the podcast mentioned this book intrigued me. He said, I read a book. I can't get it out of my mind. He said, it's funny and smart, but it's not redemptive at all. Like, it doesn't have an uplifting ending at all. It's not like that. And he said, I think it's going to be a classic in a few years. And the reason why, the story is kind of typical. It tells the story of a high school boy who goes off to boarding school. His parents have gotten divorced within the last year or so. It has some kind of scandal based off of something his father did, some kind of indiscretion, which you don't really learn until the very end of the story. And Foster Dade, he goes to this boarding school where he struggles, to make friends, and he starts making friends, and he gets, because of his parents having this scandalous separation and divorce, he goes to a psychiatrist who prescribes him Adderall for ADHD, which used to be just a normative thing that happened, and I still think where I live is something that seems to happen quite a lot. And Foster ends up dealing out the Adderall on campus to the high school students, and that kind of becomes something that he's known for. And what's interesting is it's the typical story. I mean, he falls in love with the girl. The girl's she's the girlfriend to a guy who's like the big man on campus, to use an outdated term, and yet he also becomes friends with the guy, and there's this kind of triangle, but then there's these other friends. What makes it really interesting is the fact that it takes place, the novel partially takes place with someone writing in retrospect in 2021, a student who came after Foster Dade, who's now grown up and is a reporter, is writing in 2021. The events of the story take place in 2008 through 2010. And you don't often think of that as its own era. We talk about like 90s nostalgia today. 10 years ago, it was 80s nostalgia. And people even talk about nostalgia for the early 2000s, the pre and then right after the post 9/11 world. But we don't think of what we'd call like the early Obama era as like a cultural moment. And it was, because eventually that moment is going to dissipate, as we see in the retrospect in 2021, when the adults are thinking back and trying to kind of process everything. They live in a post-Me Too world. They live in a world that is so different in terms of social media. 2008 through 2010, people are using Blackberries instead of the iPhone. Everything in social media is like Facebook, and people have blog spots, but it's not yet the era of Twitter, of TikTok, Instagram. YouTube is not used the way it is now. And I remember that, like, YouTube was something that you would use to just like watch videos, like you'd watch music videos, you would watch different things. Like it was a different era. And also, people talk about this all the time now, how teenagers, and now teenagers who are young adults, because they were talking about this, I don't know, 8 years ago, talking about high school kids 8 years ago who are now in college and out of college. They don't drink, they don't do drugs, they don't have sex. All the things that were happening, and people like in my era in high school and then in college, I was in college during the time that these characters are in high school. All the things that people were worried about, of the overconsumption, the partying, all that, is now not the world that a lot of people live in. And so there's this interesting cultural moment that is documented here that we really haven't contended with. We talk about 90s nostalgia, the simplicity, the beauty of that time, which is not true if you live through it. And we know all the things that happened, the reckoning that occurred in 2020 and 2021, which was at the tail end during the COVID era. Was at the tail end of the hashtag Me Too movement, and other things like Project 1619 and all this. It's a really interesting portrait of that time that I don't think we've really had. And I believe this is actually being made into like a series, maybe for Hulu. Greg Berlanti, who makes some really good stuff, he's made tons of shows, and a couple movies, and so I'm excited to see that. But I agree with the person who recommended this book. It's not redemptive at all, and the ending is not happy. And I remember getting about 15 pages towards the end and thinking, how are they going to wrap this up? And I kind of had an idea, and I was right, and I was sad to be right, because there isn't a happy ending here at all. There are people who compare this story. There's some kind of allusions to the Holden Caulfield. What is it? Catcher in the Rye, which is a much shorter book. I've never read it, but I kind of know the gist of the story. And there are those who think that this will be like the Catcher in the Rye for a new generation. It'll be interesting to see whether or not this does become a classic. Like I said, it portrays a world that I don't think we've really contended with yet, and so that might give it that advantage. And I'm glad that I read it. It's something that I read over a Shabbat, so I wasn't really watching television or doing things like that. I was just mostly reading. It was very cold here in rural Louisiana, but it was very cold, so there wasn't much like going outside or anything. And so there was a lot of sitting around for Shabbat, and then the Sunday after that of just reading this book. And it is something that I've thought a lot about, and I haven't actually put it on my bookshelf anywhere. I've just kind of kept it lying around, looking at it, thinking about it. And I thought maybe I need to do this little video so I can put it on my bookcase, and then maybe return to it when the television show gets made, or the miniseries gets made, which I think is supposed to be within the next year or so. So again, that's Foster Dade Explores the Cosmos. Really smart, really intelligent, not a happy or redemptive ending at all, but something to think about.